Are recording. I am here with Theresa. How are you doing today, Theresa?
I'm good, thank you. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, noticed you just because I try to check out anyone who interacts with me. I feel like if I was a street preacher or something, it's like if you make eye contact with the street preacher, they go right up to you and they're like, Have you heard about the gospel? And I feel like on Substack, it's a little less direct, but I try to check out what other people are doing.
Okay.
And the first thing I saw from you, which has been quite a popular, relatively post, because I don't know where you come from. I don't know if you kind of plopped out of nowhere, if you had friends, if you had a prior audience, but some of your pieces have been quite popular here. Um, and the first
Yeah.
one was the optimized husband's wife. And I read this, I restacked, I believe, um, a part of it. I think it was the part where the woman is listening to the man, and he's kind of like going off about something that probably doesn't matter, but she's kind of she's empathizing, or she's kind of giving him what he wants, which is not like a technical analysis or some kind of technical response, but like, oh wow, that sounds hard, that's
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of based on my real life, that piece. It's like it's joking, it's exaggerated, it's not like nonfiction. But it is kind of based on my true life. Yeah, I am in a relationship with a software engineer. So he talks about stuff that I try really hard to understand, and don't always, but I try to just like repeat back to him. And sometimes he'll talk for 5 or 10 minutes straight, just talk and talk. And I just let him do it. I realized, when we first started dating, it would annoy me. And I would be like, well, why don't we talk back and forth more? I think that's how women talk. They'll say one or two sentences and then the other person, and it's a lot more back and forth. But, sometimes men just want to explain something that they're thinking about. And I don't know. That is true. I used to work for a mental health hotline too, that joke. So that's a way that you talk to people, um, to actively listen and reflect back the points that they're making to help them sort of, I guess, make sense of what they're thinking about. So yeah, it's just kind of my real life. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely. I guess I take it as a joke that I'm laughing at myself.
Yeah. Are
Um,
you that guy?
I'm that
Do you
guy.
talk a
I'm
lot?
that
Yeah.
guy who now I'm trying to learn the other way of doing things, which is where you go back and forth. But my tendency is to info dump on people who are willing to listen, and I noticed that there is a there are emotional needs being served there, even if it's an intellectual info dump. There is a
Yeah.
need. Men have a need to be recognized for their competence, and they want to be appreciated for their efforts. So, info dumping is a way to kind of display implicitly, it's something to say the subject is speaking about not just the intellectual subject, but himself. He's saying,
Mm.
I've put all this effort into this field of research and I know all of these things. And the response that is ideal is, wow, that sounds really stressful, but also challenging. And that's really, men of that character, and maybe everybody to an extent, but there's an extreme personality type there that's like, yes, that's the optimal um, response. Now, there's other times where maybe somebody who does want actually a critical or an intellectual response, or wants some kind of competitive response. So it's not necessarily all one way all the time. But yeah, I kind of almost, there was like a reverse. I was like, wow, somebody's empathizing with my unconscious, because I'll do that. I could easily do that right now. I could go off on a 30-minute rant And then you could be like, wow, that's really interesting to tell me more. And I just keep going. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting to see almost like my personality as seen through somebody else's eyes and then to recognize myself in that. That was interesting. But I
Hmm.
also think you're just, I think the reason why you were able to do that instead of coming out and saying it, writing it like a psychology paper or something. You have a talent for creating a scene and drawing people into a scene. And there's a couple of people on Substack who I think are these they're it's almost pseudo fiction in the sense that
Mm.
you're reading something that could be fictional, but it might not be fictional, and you don't really know where the line begins or ends because a lot of people are anonymous or pseudonymous. So that almost creates more interest to me. It creates more rather than you've got a book that's published and you pick it up and it's in the fiction section and you already kind of know that it's this polished artifact as opposed to something that's maybe more raw, maybe I kind of think of like the still life paintings of the fruit, and
Mm.
like taking what could be considered maybe anodyne or everyday observations, but then kind of polishing them and making them beautiful, but also retaining this naturalistic rawness to it. It's not totally artificial. There's something genuine about it. That was the feeling that I got, and then I reached out to you, and now we're having a conversation. But in that time, you've also written a couple of other things. You've written on marriage and the mids, and that's a phrase that I've heard thrown around. There's this article you reference why men marry mid, and so what's your take on this mid phenomenon? Are we getting to something? Is this
Well, I
a
mean, I do think like right wing guys in particular love to call like actually attractive women mid, right? To like neg them. So, um, but I also think like, there's a lot of women assume that men like only care about looks and they'll pick like, they just want the most attractive woman possible. They would choose, a slightly hotter woman, even if she had a worse personality. And I don't think that's actually true. Maybe for some guys, but I think it's more complicated than that. And I just kind of wanted to poke at that and question it a little bit because I think there are character traits you can develop. I don't know. I'm not like amazingly good looking, not like ugly either, but I have found that being a good listener, being friendly, being just like a kind person, all these things are helpful in dating. So just kind of wanted to nuance that conversation a little bit. I don't know. I probably when I was a teenage girl, I read too many like weird red pill forums and stuff. But so I internalized maybe some of that. And I don't want to be like an anti feminist writer who's just like telling men what they want to hear. That's not what I want to do at all. But I do think I can kind of see like both sides of this. There's this very online like gender war that I think is kind of overblown. And sorry, I just kind of wanted to like poke through that a little bit. I think in real life, like what women want and what men want, maybe it's not actually as different or as opposed as people online, especially on the right, want to make it seem. So I was just trying to get at that a little bit.
what was that like? And sort of what age were you investigating red pill forums?
Uh, Probably like 16, 7, high school for sure. Just because, why? I mean, it was the late 2000s. The internet was more, it was kind of before that wave of feminism and wokeness and Tumblr. The internet was a lot more male dominated. It was a lot more like men's rights and pickup artists and stuff. I guess I was just curious. I didn't start dating until I was like 17. Thought of myself as like maybe I was like a femme sal a little bit. It was a little bit like what's the deal with men, and just reading the worst stuff too. But at the same time, as much as some of that stuff can be offensive, you also see there's like a lot of there's a lot of pain, and that like men are lonely and they're hurt and they want to be with women, they want to make it work, and so do so many women. I know so many women who are really lonely, and um, I don't know. I just feel like people should be able to find each other better, and the cynicism and is getting in people's way of being happy.
It's interesting. So I guess when you say late 2000s, I'm kind of thinking 2007, 2009. What was
Yeah,
the like what were the sites? I've heard of I actually somehow missed a lot of that. Like I just what it
yeah.
wasn't on my radar.
I think
Um
back then Reddit was like very male,
sure,
so you could
yeah,
find all that stuff on
absolutely.
Reddit.
Was
Um,
there a specific subreddit that you would point out as like the source of these beliefs or
oh, I
from?
don't know. I don't know if I remember that
Yeah,
in
I
detail.
remember there were Rage comics.
Oh yeah,
I don't remember the name of the subreddit, but it was like a really long. It was like a word with like 12 vowels repeated in the middle of the word or something.
yeah.
So there was that. There was a lot of pornography. There was a lot of news. I remember kind of seeing it as a game and wondering, could I post something and get a lot of upvotes? And I felt like an evil genius because I posted like clickbait for the first time, which now I'm still posting article titles that probably have a similar effect. But it was like there was a woman showing how you kill a lobster before you eat it, and she took she picked up the lobster, kissed the lobster, and then took a knife and like stabbed it through. She's like, "This is my friend, and we're gonna kill it humanely or something." And so I posted something to like our videos saying, woman kisses her friend in quotes before stabbing him through the skull, and that did very well. That got like I don't know 4,000 upvotes or whatever it needed to be on the tops of our videos or something. So I was happy with that, but didn't really pursue that much further, and didn't really see Reddit as an intellectual or place where I could learn very much. I was much more into YouTube and like the video essay and
Yeah.
people just going on lectures for hours and hours. And I had already like as a child, I always liked watching like PBS or science documentaries or something. And um, for me, it was there was a lot of economics, a lot of lectures on
Mm,
economics that I
you
was
were a
really.
libertarian.
Oh yeah, I was a libertarian. I was really interested in how the world worked and being smarter than other people and being more logical, being more rational than other people. And yeah, I felt like I had kind of cracked this code that allowed me to sort of be above everybody else because, what kid in high school is concerned with economics? Who thinks about economics? And the things that I would say, I would have very strong principled positions on the Federal Reserve and fiat currency, and so we would study FDR in history class, and I would be like, FDR was evil because he ruined our economic system or something, and no one would even be able to get offended because they wouldn't even know what I was talking about. Like, so I was completely, in a sense, I was sensitive to the idea that there was some sort of religious or cultural conflict going on, that there was some transvaluation of values. The culture had this instability baked into it. I felt I could sense that, but at the same time, I wasn't really directly engaging with it. I wasn't really hitting on the hot button issues, but I was going into this. I won't say it's a parallel fantasy world in a literal sense, like okay, economics matters at the scale of society or something, but for all intents and purposes, I wasn't I wasn't engaging with society in a way that other people could understand. I was kind of I felt like libertarianism for me was a safe space where I felt like I could think about society. I could think about the problems that we had as a civilization, but without really directly confronting those. Because when I did, I was an atheist. And when I said, well, I'm an atheist and I don't like religion, then I found this pushback. I found this conflict. And it was like this there was a desire to avoid conflict, and then there was the desire to actually engage with what was, something that's ultimately contentious. And I think libertarianism served that purpose, and economics served the purpose of making me feel like I was in the thick of it, and I was really like at the cutting edge, while also not really having to be too dangerous or offensive, because it's
Mm.
just incoherent. Like who even knows what supply and demand is or something, at least at that level. Um, and then I think over time, I started to feel that there was some significance to religion, and we had to investigate that more directly, which isn't something I did before, but I started to feel that my libertarianism was a secret religion, because we had, if somebody endorsed Keynesian economics, they were excommunicated from the Church of Libertarianism. So I started to notice the way in which it was kind of functioning like a cult, even though,
Mhm.
ostensibly we were all rationalists and atheists. At the same time, like, I had these dreams and fantasies about writing a libertarian manifesto and evangelizing and convincing people and starting a revolution and a totally new form of government, and it would be utopian, and like all of those emotions that I was feeling, I think were fundamentally religious impulses. So I kind of wanted to ask you maybe a basic question about your, did you have a secular upbringing, a Christian upbringing? What's your background with religion?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my parents were sort of like vaguely Christian, but not church going people. And I think, like you, I was like a strident teenage new atheist. I'm a little older than you, so it was YouTube didn't exist when I was like in middle school, really. But I would go on like forums and argue with like Mormon boys about like why God wasn't real and evolution was the truth. And yeah, I was definitely that kid also. And I went to a liberal arts college. I became pretty woke. My parents are pretty conservative. They're like kind of standard Mitt Romney Republicans. But I became, pretty leftist in college. And um, I was definitely like pretty far on the left, I would say, until maybe 2017 or so. And I think maybe the started to have some differences of opinions over, I don't know how to say this, like mm, certain aspects of wokeness were just a little too far for me, even though I like you all see sort of the meta political utility of wokeness. I really like that interview I did with Alex Kashuta. I was like, yes, I think this guy gets it. But um, I was very like lost in the sauce also, like, white people are evil and men are evil, and I had to move away from a lot of that. And I had kind of a red pill phase, and I've sort of moved away from that too, and I guess I'm back in the middle now. I probably like agree with Richard Hanania maybe like 80% of the time, to if that puts me somewhere politically. And religiously, it's I believe in God. I like the Bible, but I don't know if I am comfortable calling myself Christian 100%. I think that I don't know. I'm still figuring out exactly um, how I feel about that. But yeah, I do believe in God for sure. I'm not a materialist.
I want to ask you, what do you think about the relationship between religion and romantic relationships? Um, do
Mm.
you, because it's something I've been thinking about recently, is that I think that even atheists worship a god or multiple gods, and
Mm.
that's maybe metaphorical or allegorical, but
Mhm.
you could describe gooning as a form of worship, right? So you
Sure.
could say, I'm gooning, I'm worshiping the goon gods, or you could
Yeah.
say, when I was doing libertarianism, it's like, okay, you're literally listening to like preaching on this subject every day. So you're kind of worshiping in the Church of Libertarianism. And so everybody has all of these hidden gods that, we think of as, or Marvel movies or Star Wars or whatever. People are have a worshipful attitude toward different archetypes or different tribes, different lineages, even if they're concealed or rationalized or secularized. And so I think at that fundamental level, in order to have a relationship that works, there has to be some kind of coherence, or um, there has to be some kind of peacemaking. There has to be some kind of marriage among the gods, not just among,
Mm.
and maybe this is like a Jungian idea, but the, anima and animus, that
Hmm.
you're not just two monolithic individuals coming together, but you bring with you, your concept of the ideal masculine, his concept of the ideal feminine, and then a whole other constellation of things uh, that you're kind of worshiping. And so I find that for most people, this is an unconscious and maybe intuitive process. And if you're a Christian, you have this meta language or any religion, you bring this meta language to the table that kind of organizes your worship together. And that's sometimes abstract, but sometimes it's mythologized or symbolized in communion or certain acts of prayer. Basically poetry. I would say, the Lord's Prayer is a form of poetry. So, you have these reference that allow you to syncretize and congeal your worship together. But if you don't have that kind of explicit structure, religious structure, then it almost falls upon the individual to negotiate this kind of clash of the gods. You bring in your gods, I bring in my gods, and we have to mesh those together, not not be too sacrilegious, because one person profanes the other person's gods, you're gonna have a conflict, even if you love each other and have a mutual admiration in many other respects. So I guess maybe this is an I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense or not, but do you do you see where I'm going with this? And then if
Hmm.
so, how do you feel in your relationship, or more objectively, in other people's relationships? How do you, if you're maybe Christian-ish, but you're not fully
Yeah.
within that label, how do you, or how should people, and can people negotiate deep, intimate, romantic relationships without some kind of external, explicit like label or box that they put themselves in, like Christian,
Yeah.
Muslim, or whatever?
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. I guess one thing, just to get out of the way, and this might sound kind of like spooky or supernatural, I don't know, but my partner and I were both atheists when we met, and we both started believing in God like at the same time, like totally independently, not together. I think we were both sort of like embarrassed to talk about it with the other, like, oh, by the way, like I think I believe in God. And he was like, oh, I've been reading the Bible a lot. I was like, what? That's so weird. So I don't know. There's something going on with that, but I do definitely see that people who are. I mean, a lot of the best marriages that I know are people who are Catholics or people who are maybe conservative Jewish or do have a faith tradition. It can definitely help and point you in the right direction. I totally agree about the bringing our own gods together part. I think a lot about how today we'll say you have to marry someone who has the same political beliefs as you, and I always think that's very silly because first of all, your political beliefs are going to change. Both of your political beliefs are going to change, so this is not the best vetting criteria. But also, like, I don't think that what you think our tax structure should be or how you feel about geopolitics is actually like the most important aspect of a relationship. There are higher things that are more important, and yeah, shared religious values can definitely it gives you like a target to aim at.
Yeah, I think that there are certain aspects. I guess this is that you've stolen the thunder of my follow-up question, which is that I think politics do serve a religious function, even if they do so poorly or it's not adequate. I think that, and I see this, you see this in the culture, you see it reflected everywhere. Dating apps where especially women, I don't see a man saying, I will only date a liberal woman. But he might actually say, I
They say I won't
am.
date feminists. I've
Sure,
heard
yeah,
guys
it's
say that.
almost men, maybe even both. I think for both men and women, the way that they signal their political selectivity in dating is not, I need you to be this type of person. I need you to be a Jill Stein supporter or something. But it's, you cannot be a Trump supporter. You cannot be a feminist. So it is a negative identity. And I almost think of that in terms of, ancient marriages, mixed marriages, where it wasn't so much maybe that, um, maybe it wasn't so much that you must positively worship in a particular way, but that, you can't worship demons, you can't worship idols, you can't, sacrifice your children to Molech or something. Like there are certain, um, taboos that restrict. Also, a lot of dietary laws, which I think that's
Mhm.
still today. But a lot of ancient dietary laws would say if you are in this caste, you have to eat this type of food. Even we don't think about this very often, but ancient Israelites had a caste system. Modern Jews, have kind of they don't really engage with this. Um, but there was a concept of, there's a specific tribe, and if you're descended from that one tribe, then you are a priest. And the priests are really not supposed to be eating. I mean, there's still the concept of kosher, but there was a stricter version, a more exclusive version, that you really shouldn't be eating meat if it hasn't been consecrated and slaughtered in a particular way, and that some of the meat of the animal has to be sacrificed in a ritual, a burnt offering. And so, if you are of that caste, then if somebody within that caste is not eating the correct diet,
Mm.
then they're not eligible for marriage. And to marry such a person would have been scandalous. We still actually have that today with vegans, right? Where they'll say, I will only kiss somebody who's a vegan, because to kiss somebody whose lips have touched meat is to be impure, to be morally impure. So it's the same psychological function. It's without maybe the metaphysical trappings of religion, although sometimes, I really do wonder, when we think about like a genuine faith in God. Sometimes I think there's a conception that like ancient people in the ancient world were schizophrenics, and they were constantly like seeing visions and so on. And I wonder, like, we today think, I think the bicameral mind idea is that, physiologically we're changed today, so we're less schizophrenic than we were before. But I wonder if sometimes, like, technology, and not just the internet, but the silver screen, Hollywood, and even the invention of theatrical drama in ancient Greece, I wonder if these artistic forms, they're presented as a fiction, and so we don't have to directly believe in them. But I wonder if at some point in the past, art was simply taken literally, like there was no distinction between mythology and fiction, and people didn't conceive of, oh, well, I love Harry Potter, but I know at the end of the day it's fictional. I don't actually believe in Hogwarts. But ancient people, they would have believed in Hogwarts, and they would have made no distinction between being a Harry Potter fan and worshiping Dumbledore or something. Like, so that separation that we make in the modern day between, oh, well, I just love Star Wars, I just love Harry Potter, but I don't believe it's real. Like that concept of faith or that concept of belief, um, I almost think that it disguises an underlying psychological continuity between ancient peoples who really loved their gods and worshiped their gods, and us today. We still love and worship and have fandom, as Catherine D talks about. Um, that phenomena, I don't think we've actually. I spoke recently with Simon Laird, and he was telling me that one of his big issues with our culture is the rise of superstition. Now he's saying that the left is more superstitious. I'm saying the right is more superstitious. But we both agreed that we're becoming more superstitious as a culture. And then it's like, with what respect to what? With respect to a more Christian culture that was less superstitious in it, and there was less astrology, less crystals, less conspiracy theories or something. But at the same time, it's like it wasn't atheistic, it wasn't secular. So it's almost like you can never really remove the supernatural from human psychology. You can just manage it in better ways. In the same way, like you can't eliminate human sexuality, but you can maybe make people be monogamous and keep it within a marriage or something. So I kind of see like a religion is its job is not to eliminate spirituality, but it's kind of to put it in Pandora's box, keep it contained, and make sure it doesn't get out of hand. And then when you say, well, let's abolish religion, get rid of it, people don't just become non-religious; they just become eccentric, idiosyncratic, and we call that superstition. But I guess I wanted to ask another question related to religion and maybe the one man, one woman, and the gods that they share or that are opposed, and also talk a little bit about friendship and community as an
Yeah.
aspect of relationship. Because I think what like red pill style advice and even certain aspects of feminism, although I think it's probably better on that end, and maybe to the opposite extent or degree. But this question of the role of society in the relationship, or the role of the collective in the, or Freud would say the superego, how people not just see the other person in the relationship, but there's this kind of third person, which sometimes is called God, sometimes it's society, sometimes it's morality, politics, whatever. But there's this like super egoic force that's watching the two people in the relationship, and they're not just judging each other individually, but they're judging, how am I going to be perceived because of my girlfriend in the eyes of society or in the eyes of God, and vice versa. And I think women tend to be more aware and sensitive to social pressures and conformism and politics or religion. They're more sensitive to the idea of if my boyfriend has the wrong political views or the wrong religious views or whatever, there's going to be some kind of, even if it's a secret view, right? Even if it's
Yeah.
like you're alone in the room with your boyfriend and he makes an off-color remark, then maybe nobody hears it and you don't need to tell anybody. But there's this sense of ever-present judgment of he's just violated a norm that maybe has nothing to do with me as an individual, but it would be judged super egoically, and therefore there's a conflict that results from that. So I guess I'm saying that's why I think that as much as you're saying politics can change, I think when people are excluding partners on the basis of politics, what they're attempting to do is they're attempting some kind of super egoic triangulation, where
Mm,
they're like, I might love you or be attracted to you as an individual, but a romantic relationship, isn't just between two individuals. It's between two individuals and society or the church or the community or something like
yeah.
that. And so, can you speak a little bit again, either your
Yeah.
relationship or how you think things should go generally? Um, what is how do people coordinate that? Do you kind of
Yeah.
try to ignore society as best as possible? Do you integrate that? How do you relate to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think people have always cared, of course, about what their family and their immediate community and their social class thinks about the romantic relationships, as well as friendships and business partnerships and things like that. We've always cared what the people around us think, but the idea of caring about like what the public thinks about these things is kind of a newer idea. Like dating advice has really only existed since the late 19th century. Statistics about relationships and sex only really started to be collected in the 1920s, 1930s. So for a lot of human history, like you weren't comparing yourself to like the average person in your country or like the average guy on the planet. You were just sort of comparing yourself to people within your social class, within your regional community. So gosh, I lost my train of thought. What you said also made me think about how like how women care more about this. In some religions, I'm pretty sure in Islam, like a Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim woman, like a Christian woman, but a Muslim woman has to marry a Muslim man. So that's kind of an interesting point
Yeah, it's sort of
about
an interesting inversion of like a red pill idea, which is that women have this codependent slash depressive, or what is the term, the Stockholm syndrome,
yeah
that women are predisposed toward a survival strategy or an evolutionary strategy where if there is some kind of hostile takeover of society, rather than stubbornly resisting assimilation into the new norms, they simply conform to those new norms. And there's an ability, there's some kind of greater ability to cope with a change in norms. And when men, and maybe male-brained people who are very stubborn, very opinionated, very disagreeable, and they often, I think, develop a hostility toward women on this basis because they say, okay, well, women are conforming to something just because it's popular. They're not judging it for its inherent worth. They're not using critical thinking. They're simply uncritically adopting, the social norms of whatever's popular at the time, even if, those things are destructive. But we also have to maybe temper that criticism with a recognition that throughout human history, on a biological level, that strategy generally works. Like if
yeah
something is popular, it generally works to just go along to get along with that framework. And in fact, if nobody did that, if everybody scrutinized and litigated every single facet of our society endlessly, we could never agree on anything. We could never coordinate. We could never unify. And in the case of even a hunter-gatherer tribe, if you're on the plain, the steppe, the savanna, wherever you're in this Minecraft open world, and you've got north, south, east, and west, and you got a tribe of people, and they say, okay, well, which direction should we go? If everybody disagrees, then you split up the tribe four ways. Now you're 25% of the size, and you eventually die out. Whereas if you choose one direction, even if it's the wrong direction, even if there's no water or food in that direction, you stay unified, and you actually have a better chance of survival if you make a wrong choice as a collective than if you make four choices and one of them is right, and so on. So there is a hardcore game theory logic to being conformist and collectivistic that individual men who think of themselves as smarter than everybody else will say, well, we should just think about it and figure it out. But the truth is that most people are not capable of just thinking about God and philosophy and morality and all of these things from first principles and figuring that out. And even very smart people disagree on all of those things. So the idea that then somehow the average person should be responsible for taking up that quest and not just defaulting to the authority structure as it is, that's you're kind of creating, well, not you, but I'm saying that men who are highly disagreeable and think of themselves as intelligent, they tend to place judgment on others and to not accept that different way of thinking, and to think of themselves as in a sense superior, maybe not morally superior necessarily, but they do think of themselves as superior. Whereas on the other hand, somebody who's buying into the collective movement is going to look at a disagreeable man like that and call him an incel, right? He's a weirdo freak, whatever,
yeah
and he's creepy and so on. And so, like, I guess the direction I'm going with this is that you mentioned how you think people who are maybe in religious marriages can be happier because it kind of solves a lot of problems. It kind of mediates a lot of potential conflicts. And then on the other hand, as people become less religious, they're trying to recreate that form of mediation through politics, but it's not necessarily successful. Um, maybe if you're although I wonder if that's becoming less true. I wonder if that's becoming more successful as politics becomes more sticky, as politics becomes more polarized and separated. If it becomes harder to kind of switch from one end to the other. Now, people like you and me, maybe we're like this unique subset of the population where we have made those sorts of transitions. But I wonder if for the average person that is becoming less common, and as a result, if you can say, yeah, I mean, I'm a Jill Stein supporter. Okay, well, are you gonna radically change that position anytime soon? Is that something that can be the basis of maybe it's not a good basis, but it's a basis for a relationship. And then on the other end, it's like if you believe in QAnon, or if you're in kind of a subset of Trump supporters, that's specific enough. That specificity, I think, is also important, rather than just saying I'm sort of vaguely a liberal or I'm vaguely a conservative, because a lot of people actually they might they might identify on one side or the other, but if you ask them like what specific policies are you for or against, they don't have like a doctrinal or dogmatic understanding of their own side. It's just kind of a vague tribalism. And so I think that people who are more invested specifically in politics and maybe networked into people who volunteer for campaigns and things like that, I think that is kind of that is a subculture where people are finding dates and partners. Is you show up to a rally, you show
Yeah.
up to a protest, and that's actually, I think, for some people, that's their primary kind of dating scene. It's not the bar, it's not church, but it's political activism, which is increasingly becoming online, just as all dating is increasingly shifting towards apps and online. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess do you think on that topic, the sources of date? You talked how dating is like a 19th century invention, and maybe you can
Yeah.
include that in your response. But like, do you think that this trend away from traditional areas of courtship, whether it's the church or the bar, and more toward the internet, do you think that is a negative? Do you think there's pros and cons to that?
Mhm.
And what do you think? Should people just kind of work within that system? Is there some should we be going back to church and meeting people that way? What are your
Yeah,
ideas
I
on
don't
that?
know. I wish I had the answers. I'm pretty negative on online dating. I've never really done it myself. I've only met like friends online, which I have had good luck with, relatively. But um, I think my problem with online dating is I actually think a lot of what makes the relationship good just sort of comes down to aspects of chemistry that can't really be assessed online. I mean, there's a lot of studies about like people who are in happy long-term relationships. They just like the way the other person smells. It comes down to like pheromones and things like that. So I do think if you're meeting someone online, it's easy to kind of like fall for somebody's their ideas or their online jokes, their sense of humor, and then you meet them in person and just the way they move, the way they are embodied in the world, they just don't smell right. Like it doesn't work, and that can be really disappointing. I mean, I hear a lot of people who date on the apps. They'll like chat online for quite a while before they meet in person, which is so weird to me. So I think if you are going to meet people online, try to meet in person as soon as possible to see if you have actual chemistry. Because if not, maybe that person should just be your friend. I think it can be really confusing if you like on an intellectual level fall for someone and then you don't actually have that physical compatibility. What was
That's
your other
that's
question?
extremely interesting.
Okay.
Um, That's very interesting. I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I'm wondering, to add to that, to add basically saying that, your compatibility with a person, you'd and I as you were speaking, I was just imagining kind of like a meetup group. Like, they do these things like, oh, we're gonna singles running together, singles night at the bar. All the singles are
Mhm.
gonna congregate, and I was just thinking like, singles smelling contest. Like, everybody raise your hand and like get a. And you go along in a line and you find who smells best. And like, that's not gonna happen. But if it did, um,
I think people would have better luck. I
yeah, yeah,
seriously
yeah. I
do.
was like, you know what? It really rings true in a lot of ways. And also what you said about movement, right? So
Mm,
in the 1950s, and I mean, it didn't just start and end in the 1950s. It goes back like 19th century as well. But the idea that it wasn't just like, dancing in the club. Not that I'm a big club guy, but dancing in the club is um is a very it's a very different structure. The
mhm.
origin of that is that you would have kind of a formalized thing where you wouldn't just go up to somebody. I don't know. It wasn't as like brutally sexual and selective in the
Yeah.
way that, like, you go in a beeline toward the person you're attracted to, or you start grinding with that person. No, it was like you really did have this almost musical chairs structure where you dance with somebody for a few minutes, and then you'd switch partners and dance with somebody else.
Mhm.
And so it was in a form. It was a kind of speed dating where you
Mhm.
actually got to. And I was just watching a German film from the 1930s, and there was a dinner party going on at home, and there was a husband and a wife, and then there was this subtext or subplot about this friend who had a thing with the wife or something. And she goes for a dance with the friend, and now today I'm kind of like, and I don't know, there maybe I could explain this by saying, like, Zoomers are uncomfortable with naked boomers in the YMCA locker room. And so
Yeah.
we've shifted some of our views of human sexuality and tactility, our ability to touch other people, and what that signifies in the naked body and so on. So I'm not sure if that's the underlying shift that's gone on. But to me, I was watching that and I was thinking, oh, bro, that's your wife. You can't let your wife dance with somebody at that's your wife, bro. But that was actually, I think, more normal, because we don't do ballroom dancing anymore. We
I
don't do
know.
that kind of thing anymore. So I almost think having that institutionally, culturally, did allow people to um, get a very quick understanding of the tactility and the movement of another person. Like, how does your body function, and then we kind of become one body. We dance together and we see, like, okay, is this coordinated, is this intuitive, does this work out? You can tell a lot. And there used to be theories about electromagnetism, or they called it animal magnetism, where they felt
Mm,
that human beings had this electrical field, and you could detect the electrical field of other people by being in contact with them. Now, that may be pseudoscientific, but like you're talking about with the pheromones and the smells, there might be some sense in which we're unconsciously or intuitively gathering data about people through tactility, through presence with other people, that you simply can't gather over the internet. People are going to watch this podcast and they're simply not going to be able to, understand who I am or who you are in the same way that they could if we went ballroom dancing with them, or if
mm,
we had them smell our armpits or something. Right? There's missing information here, because
yeah.
people put on performances, like you said, intellectually on the internet. You can be very funny, you can be very smart, but at the end of the day, are you going to have that deep, intuitive, uh, I don't know, primordial connection with another person? Maybe not. And one of the so Catherine D is a person I've mentioned already. I'll mention her again to say that I used to be a person who thought, and I think maybe you're sympathetic to this position, and I don't think it's entirely wrong, but that the internet kind of is the source of people's social anxiety and many other problems. That because everything is now funneled through the channel of the internet, through this tunnel vision of the internet, we're losing a lot of these intuitive, instinctual aspects of the human experience, and everything is just becoming abstract and intellectualized. But another way to think about it is that as people become more socially dysfunctional, as the intuitive functions are suppressed, as our instincts atrophy, the internet becomes more attractive and
Mm.
people flock to the internet. And so this is almost, whether you believe in mutational load theory or you think it's more cultural, you could say this hypothesis is that we as a people have become we have lost our pineal glands. We lost our third eye. We lost our intuition and our instinct and our bodily tactile senses. We've lost our sense of smell. We've lost our ability to detect pheromones. And as that has progressed, as it's continued, we have become less and less able to understand each other on those planes. And it's harder for men to go up to and again, the internet is it's oh well, these kids are raised on the internet, of course they don't know how to talk to girls, and it's
Yeah.
the internet's fault. But the reverse causality, and it could be a feedback loop, but the reverse
Hmm.
causality is to say that as our culture started to suppress our either, again, it could be something biological, it could be cultural, but as we started to suppress or decrease in our ability to understand each other in a bodily, tactile, intuitive way, people fled to the internet because they started to realize, like, I don't understand humans anymore. Something's breaking down. There's a gender war. People don't understand each other. And I notice this all the time with Zoomers is there's this people look back and forth and they're on the phone in the same room. Is it the phone's fault? And that's what people think. They think I have a phone addiction. I'm addicted to my phone. It's the phone's fault. I have to use the phone. Or is the phone just a coping mechanism for a problem that predates the phone, which is this social anxiety? Now, again, I'm not saying it has to be just one way or the other. It could be both at the same time. But I'm experimenting with this idea that maybe like and here's a really wild one for you. I don't know if you'll agree with this, but like COVID caused us to lose our sense of smell collectively. Like people lost their sense of smell.
Yeah.
And so could that be part of the reason why since COVID people have had a lot of social anxiety? Because they can't smell other people. They can't identify, understand other people around them. And so it gives this sense of alienation and distance and dissociation. So we're having this huge dissociative episode as a culture where we're socially anxious. We don't understand each other. We're afraid of other people because we don't know who they are. Are you a friend? Are you an enemy? Are you a lover? Are you a hater? I don't know because I can't smell you because COVID destroyed my nose. So that's kind of like a biological maybe analogy for a deeper cultural phenomenon. But yeah, everything you just said that opened up a line of reason. Do you have any thoughts? Do you think? I think most people at this point are more like the internet caused social anxiety rather than the other way around. But have you considered that question before?
Yeah, I think I am drawn to the idea that maybe it's a bit of both, and maybe they're reinforcing each other. I think if you look back in the '90s and think about who was using the internet back then. I mean, it was weird nerds, right? It was not like cool, outgoing people. They were not on IRC chat or whatever. So, yeah, I think as more people come online, um, being online makes them more anxious, or maybe there are other cultural factors that are making young people more anxious. I'm not sure, but I do think the phones probably make people more socially inept, and I guess I see it as more of a positive feedback loop. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's this fundamental question of addiction is do people become addicted to things because the addiction is a coping mechanism for dealing
Mhm.
with a pre-existing problem, or do people become addicted to things apropos of nothing and then, now they're stuck in this. It's like, you just fell into a hole accidentally and now you're in this hole, and so the addiction itself is the cause behind the problems. And there have been studies done. I think Portugal or Spain have experimented with drug legalization, and they've looked at who, what predicts people falling into addiction, what predicts people getting out of addiction, and they found it had to do things like communal meaning, friendships, family, employment, having structure in your life, having expectations, having responsibilities. And when you don't have something that consumes your life, like having friends and family and community and church and a job, I mean that's not just a 40-hour a week thing. That's like an 80-hour a week thing. I mean that's your whole
Yeah.
life. And so if people have something that occupies their life, that consumes their life, then it's harder to have an addiction than if you have no friends, no family, no church, no job. I think people have a natural desire to be consumed, to be occupied, to be busy, to be active, to be on some kind of quest or adventure, to feel a thrill. I think this is why people watch horror movies, is because maybe there's like an inbuilt desire for understanding that violence is a part of our evolutionary history. And it used to be much more common to see violence on a regular basis. And now that that's not really a part of modern life, we kind of have to seek it out. We kind of have to figure out a way to reintegrate that part of the historical human experience into the modern day. And we do it through horror movies, which I was like, why do you want to make yourself scared? That didn't intellectually make sense to me. But that's my explanation now. And, uh, and so, yeah, I guess I think that for somebody who's suffering from an addiction, whether it's a phone addiction or something else, internet addiction, drug addiction, I think with the drugs, it's obviously a direct neurochemical injection into your bloodstream, so it's a little bit different. You have withdrawal symptoms and so on. But I think for behavioral addictions like gambling, for example, I think it's generally somebody's looking to fulfill a basic emotional need that they have, and the addiction is their best attempt to do that, because there's an absence that needs to be filled. And so, if we are able to fulfill or fill that absence, then there would be no need for the addiction. But in the absence, if you don't have something to replace the addiction with something else, to substitute it for something else, then to live life and to just say, okay, well, I'm not going to be addicted to that anymore. I'm just going to twiddle my thumbs. People almost need, and I'm bringing it back to this concept of worship and religion. Like an addiction is a form of worship. I mean, this is how Christian theologians talk about prayers. They say
Mhm.
you should pray unceasingly. You should never stop. I mean, I should be praying right now in this conversation, and if I'm eating something, I'm praying while I'm eating. And so that, in a sense, is like kind of an obsessive compulsive mentality, the religious mentality. And so when you take that away from people, the fact that addiction then fills that void, to me seems logical.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I was just thinking about how like the process of just doing drugs can be very ritualistic for people who are addicts, whether you're um, lining up cocaine or packing a bong with weed or whatever. Like it can be a ritual for people who are drug users. Probably it's similar for people who are gambling or something. It might feel almost sort of scratches the same itch as like lighting candles in church or something like that. So I definitely agree. And that also makes me think. You were talking earlier about drama and storytelling and how that ties into religion, and that made me think about how like early Greek theater comes from rituals and like religious rituals. So yeah, storytelling, drug use, all these things are kind of like can be substitutes for, I think, that need that we have to worship and to have rituals and to have something higher or beyond the material to focus on.
As we're coming to the end of our hour here, I want to make sure I ask you, get because I'm actually not super familiar with this, the roots of dating, the origin of dating. You know,
Yeah,
when did that come about? Was there something that predated dating?
yeah,
Was it just arranged marriage? Can you explain some of that?
yeah, sure. If you were Yeah, I would say before the Enlightenment, that would have been, at least in the West, it's kind of like a soft version of arranged marriage. If you really didn't like the person your parents picked, you could say no. But it would be heavily mediated by the families of both parties. The nobility, the aristocracy tended to marry very young in their teens. Boys too. The peasantry married more like in late teens, 20s, maybe mid 20s. But so in like the 19th century, with the rise of capitalism and liberalism and urbanization, you get this practice of calling. So you have like the gentleman caller who brings his calling card to the lady's house, and he comes in, he visits, and they talk and tell stories, get to know each other. Usually, her parents are in the house, so can maintain some proper optics socially, but that was like the norm until maybe the 1890s, which is where you start getting urban working class people. They start dating because they're living in tiny, cramped apartments. So you can't really go over to a girl's house if she lives in a one-bedroom apartment with her entire family. So they start going out to carnivals, to vaudeville shows, all this new entertainment that is starting to exist. At first, it's a very like low class thing, sort of like the working immigrants, in the cities. But then upper class people start doing it because they think it's cool and hip. They start dating too. And then eventually it spreads to middle class people. So what dating does is it takes courtship out of the family and out of the home and into the public sphere. And it also it forces like the guy to spend money up front. If you're just like calling on a girl, like you might buy her flowers, you want to like look nice, so you might buy a new outfit, but really you don't have to spend money. She'll probably like make tea or sandwiches or something. So I think that dating, it was it's more similar to sex work in some ways. And so I think that creates this tension where even as early as the 1920s, 1930s, you see young men who are sort of like, well, why am I spending all this money to take out this girl and I'm not getting anything out of it? Maybe these guys are aware you, for the same amount of money, you could just go to a brothel if that's what you really want. So it seems like a bad deal. And I think this tension is a big part of why the sexual revolution happened. I mean, obviously, the invention of the pill was the main catalyst, but uh, yeah, so that's a little bit about the history of dating.
I think that's very interesting. Yeah, and the idea that the sexual revolution happened in the 1960s as this singular event is really, it's a huge oversimplification
Yeah,
when we consider
yeah,
what happened in the 1890s. I mean, a picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde, very clearly a gay movement that
mm-hmm.
was surrounding him. Certainly not as out there, out of the closet as the 1960s, but still, we have to go back there. We have to understand that history if we want to understand, the 1960s. I think there's this tendency, a conspiratorial view that sees the 1960s as this. And I think things happen top down. I think elites matter, but I think at the same time that things develop over time, and there's a precedent for everything. There's a causal chain for everything, and the idea that there was like a metaphysical force that dropped out of the sky, and then everybody, the 1960s, and then everybody went crazy. It's like, that was even. So even if you would say like, oh well, it was the elites who did that, right? Well, where did that elite culture come from? How did that come to be? Because I was watching this Christian documentary on abortion. I was talking about Margaret Sanger and Havelock, or I think that was his name, Darwin. So they were trying to marry all of these different movements together, which is like scientific racism, eugenics, sexual revolution, anarchism, communism. They were like, this is all one big thing, which is, not necessarily true, but at least there's kind of getting to something, which is that there really was in the 19th century these very revolutionary political movements, utopian movements,
Yeah,
social movements, that were, for the vast majority of people, not really visible. The average person on the street wasn't aware that something was going on necessarily, that they were living through a social or sexual revolution in the same way that in the 1960s it was obvious and explicit. But like that's necessary to understand. So yeah, bringing that in and talking about some of the economics and the shifting urbanism, yeah, and also the working class function. So one of the red pill quote unquote truths is that women used to all get married at 16. Every single
Yeah.
woman got married at 16. And it only gets younger. And then you get back to Muhammad, it's like 9, right? And
Yeah,
so they have
no.
this very linear view of human sexuality as, in the past, what it means to be traditional is to have a younger marriage, and getting married when you're older is a crisis of modernity. But actually, economically, the average age of marriage for women, 200 years ago was like 26 or something. The Puritans were their age of first marriage was in the mid 20s, and that was largely for economic reasons. Like you said, people were forced to live with their parents, and it was considered to be difficult, if not impossible, to get married if you didn't have some degree of financial independence, and people were a huge amount of people were working, as maids or servants in somebody else's house, and so they really weren't able to get married under that situation. They had to kind of like get out of that indentured servitude so that they could get married. So it's interesting to kind of see these different cycles and these different periods of history, changing urban structures, economic structures, and yeah, I definitely want to learn more about that in the future, and I'll be looking forward to seeing what you're publishing next. When I first, like I said, I first messaged you when you only had one article out,
Yeah.
and I just kind of said, oh, this is. This isn't. Maybe I don't have a ton of interview questions just to go off this single article, but in the intervening time, you've continued publishing stuff, and definitely, I look forward to seeing what comes out next. Do you have any previews for us? Anything you're working on?
Yeah, well, I would like to keep writing about social history and women's history and these kind of topics because I am pretty knowledgeable about them actually, and I read a ton of like feminist history books when I was younger, and I feel like I can sort of present these ideas maybe in a more centrist or center right, socially conservative, friendly way. Yeah, a lot of people on the right seem to think that like before the 1960s, it was there was just like this one traditional way of doing things from the Bronze Age until 1950, or that it was just very repressive and like slowly getting more liberal. And this is just not true at all. And everything you were saying about marriage age is true, and it's a lot of interesting stuff there. So yeah, maybe I'll write more about that. I'm also working on a review of. I just read Nutcracker, the novel by Dan Baltic, and I really liked it. It was really funny. It's about kind of a extremely online right wing guy who just gets himself into a lot of very funny situations. So I would definitely recommend that book, and yeah, hopefully I'll write a review of that in the next week or so. So yeah.
Very cool. Um, with that said, I want to give you any last words, any final thoughts. If there's other writers you haven't already promoted on your Substack, let me know what you're reading and what you think people should check out.
Yeah, I mean, I've been restacking a lot of people, but I would say if you're interested in autofiction, if you liked the autofiction that I wrote, Caleb Caudell is a really good writer who's writing in that style on Substack. So check it out.
Beautiful. Theresa, this was great. I
Thanks.
felt very stimulated by this conversation, and hopefully everybody else did as well. And hopefully, once you've got some more pieces out, we'll have more to talk about, and we can
Yeah,
reconnect in the future.
I'd love that. Yeah, it was great to talk to you.
Beautiful. All right. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
All right, see ya.
All right. Bye bye. All right. This is a good one. Good to get into feminism, gender relations. Good to discuss all of that. So yeah, that was one of those. I saw she had one piece of fiction out there, and I said it's good. It's not a lot. I don't have a ton of interview questions, but let's do an interview. And then by the time we actually got it together, she had some more pieces out. So that worked out well. That was kind of that was me buying the $5 lottery ticket and hitting the jackpot because I think that was a good one. Sometimes somebody has like a, I don't know, they have a lot of, the worst case scenario is you ask someone for an interview and then they cancel the same day, which happened to me 3 times in recent history. Hey, I know we planned this a month in advance, but I need to cancel right now. Okay, it's not like I had anything better to do. It's not like, no, no, I'm just kidding. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not going to complain. This is not the complaining podcast. We don't complain on this podcast. Everybody has good reasons for canceling last minute on me. No, I'm just joking around. I'm just joshing you. I'm very much early. Normally, I have to get off these calls immediately because I've got things to do. But honestly, I've had some cancellations, and so now I'm like, I've got too much time on my hands. I don't know what to do with myself. I guess I'm gonna have to message some people and see if they're available early today, and yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, guys, I appreciate your time and attention. Oh my gosh, somebody is sick. Oh, that's crazy. I'm sorry to hear. I'm sorry to read messages during this podcast. I'm not supposed to be doing that, but anyway, I'm going to sign it off there, guys. Thank you once again. Make sure to like, comment, restack. Go check out Theresa. And until next time, stay tuned. We'll have more lovely content coming your way. Bye bye.